Homeless woman finds a millionaire's wallet while looking for a job on the street. He fell madly in love. Before watching the video, please leave a like to support our channel. Comment number 8 if you want to know the end of the story. The wind in Brookstone that morning wasn't cruel, but it carried a kind of indifference that made people tighten their coats and walk faster. For Lena Carter, it was just another reminder that the world moved on, even when you had nothing left. Her fingers, red from the cold, trembled as she adjusted the fraying laces on her worn sneakers. Her stomach had been growling for 2 days, but today it felt like it had given up complaining. She hadn't eaten since Tuesday, unless a half-crushed granola bar she found behind a dumpster counted. She walked the cracked sidewalks of the city, not with hope, but with a dull kind of persistence. Checking bulletin boards, reading store windows, silently pleading for a help-wanted sign to appear like a miracle. Anything. A dishwasher, a janitor, a delivery helper. Something to keep her going. Then fate flickered. As she bent to retie her shoelace, something caught her eye. Just beneath the flickering orange glow of a street lamp, half tucked beneath a newspaper, lay a dark leather wallet. Sleek, structured, the kind rich men carried. It didn't look lost. It looked misplaced by someone who didn't need to hold on to things too tightly. Her breath caught. She picked it up slowly as if it might vanish. When she opened it, Lena's heart stuttered. Cash. More than she had seen in months. Stacks of it, neatly folded bills that smelled like air conditioning and polished floors. Just one of them could buy her warmth for the week. A meal, a room, a new beginning. But alongside the cash were business cards, a driver's license, and a name she recognized from a billboard on Main Street. Grayson Whitmore, CEO of one of the largest development firms in the state. A man whose name alone could buy doors to open. For a long moment, Lena stood there, alone with the weight of a choice. She could run. No one had seen her. No one would know. But in her heart, she heard her grandmother's voice, soft and stern, like the crackle of an old radio. Baby girl, always leave the world better than you found it, even when the world forgets about you. Lena closed the wallet, pressed it to her chest, and made a decision. She would find him. It took Lena over 2 hours to walk to the address printed on the business card. Her feet ached with every step, her legs trembling from hunger and exhaustion. The neighborhood she passed grew cleaner, quieter, richer. Iron fences gave way to stone walls. The air itself felt heavier, filled with things she couldn't name but had always been kept from. When she finally reached the gates of the Whitmore estate, she stopped and stared. It was a mansion, yes, but it felt more like a fortress. Tall iron gates, pristine gardens, and walls so smooth they reflected the morning light like glass. The kind of place where people like her were nothing more than shadows to be shooed away. Still, she walked up to the intercom and pressed the button. Nothing. She waited, then clapped her hands twice, her voice cracking as she called, "Hello? Excuse me?" There was silence and then finally footsteps. A tall man in a crisp shirt and pressed trousers appeared behind the gate. He squinted at her, his gaze landing on her tattered coat, her sunken cheeks, her trembling fingers. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone not unkind but certainly uninterested. "I need to speak to Mr. Grayson Whitmore," she said, swallowing hard. The man raised an eyebrow, arms folding across his chest. "Mr. Whitmore isn't seeing anyone, especially not—" He trailed off, but the sentence hung heavy in the air. Lena's cheeks burned. She knew exactly what he meant. She looked like a problem, not a person. Still, she held her ground. "It's important," she said firmly. "He dropped something. I came to return it." The man laughed dryly. "Lady, you think people like you just show up here and get a sit-down with one of the richest men in the state? Whatever you're selling, we're not buying." "I'm not selling anything," she replied, lifting the wallet from inside her coat. "I found this. It's his. I'm not leaving until I give it to him myself." For the first time, the man's eyes locked onto the wallet in her hand. Something shifted in his expression. Doubt, maybe? Curiosity? Or perhaps a fear that she might be telling the truth. He hesitated. "Wait here," he muttered, turning away and disappearing down the gravel path. Lena stood alone outside the gate, hands clutching the wallet so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could feel every breath, every heartbeat. She could hear 1,000 versions of herself whispering, "You should have kept it. "What are you doing here? This place was never meant for you." But she stayed. She stayed because doing the right thing shouldn't require permission. Inside the mansion, Grayson Whitmore was standing in his study, sleeves rolled, phone pressed to his ear, his expression tense. He didn't even glance up when his assistant knocked and said, "There's a young woman at the gate. Says she needs to see you. She looks rough, real rough. Claims she found your wallet." Grayson froze. His hand reached to the back pocket of his tailored slacks. Empty. The call ended with a single word. Later. He turned, eyes narrowing. "Bring her in." The gates creaked open slowly like they hadn't moved in years. Lena stood frozen, not by fear, but by the sheer unreality of what was happening. The mansion in front of her stretched out like a dream she had no right to enter. But she stepped forward, wallet clutched to her chest like armor. She followed the gravel path, her footsteps soft, swallowed by the manicured silence of the estate. And there, at the top of the stone steps, stood Grayson Whitmore. Tall, composed, expensively dressed, but without a trace of arrogance in the way he stood. His eyes, a cool, stormy gray, studied her with quiet intensity. Lena didn't speak. She simply walked up the last step, reached into her coat, and handed him the wallet. "I found this," she said, her voice hoarse from thirst and wind. "On Ashford in 8th, this morning." Grayson opened the wallet slowly, like he was afraid of what he might find. Everything was still there, every bill, every card, even the folded note with numbers scrawled in his late wife's handwriting. "You didn't take anything," he murmured, glancing at her. Lena looked him straight in the eyes. "It wasn't mine." That simple sentence landed with more weight than either of them expected. Grayson was used to people coming to him with open hands and closed hearts. But here she was, with nothing to her name, offering him something that most in his world had long forgotten. Integrity. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lena Carter." "Do you live nearby?" She hesitated. "I don't live anywhere. Not at the moment." There was a silence then, a thick, human silence that made time feel slower. "I lost my job," she continued. "Then I lost my apartment. My grandmother passed, and I had no one left. I've been looking for work, but—" Her voice trailed off, and she gestured vaguely to her clothes, her shoes, her hunger. "People don't exactly line up to hire someone who looks like they haven't slept indoors." Grayson nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. But inside, something cracked. Something he hadn't felt since the day he buried his wife. "You could have disappeared with this," he said, holding up the wallet. "No one would have found you." "I'd still know," Lena replied quietly. "And that's worse." Grayson looked down at the wallet again, then to her. And in a move that surprised even himself, he said, "Come inside, you need a warm drink. And maybe we'll talk." Lena stepped over the threshold of the mansion, not as a thief, not as a beggar, but as a woman who had chosen honor, even when the world had offered her nothing in return. And Grayson, who had all the money in the world, suddenly realized maybe it was her who had something to offer him. The warmth of the mansion enveloped her like a dream she dared not trust. Marble floors, velvet curtains, a chandelier that glimmered like 1,000 suns. But Lena didn't stare. She walked slowly, silently, her hands clasped in front of her like she was trying not to touch the air. Grayson led her into a quiet parlor off the main hallway. A fireplace flickered low in the corner, casting golden light across the polished wood floors. He motioned to a plush armchair. "Sit," he said gently. "I'll have something brought." Moments later, a housekeeper entered, a kind-eyed woman in her 50s, wearing an apron and concern on her face. She carried a tray with a steaming cup of tea and a plate of buttered toast. "Here you are, miss," she said warmly, setting it down in front of Lena. "Eat. You look like you could use it." Lena nodded, barely whispering "thank you," before wrapping her hands around the mug. It was the first warmth she had felt in days. Grayson sat across from her, not speaking at first. He just watched her, studying the delicate way her fingers trembled as she lifted the toast to her mouth, the way she tried to hide her hunger but failed, not out of shame, but humility. "I don't want charity," Lena said softly between sips. "I just want to work. Anything. Cleaning, kitchen, errands. I'll do whatever's needed. I need a fresh start." He didn't answer right away. His eyes wandered toward the hallway where tiny footsteps suddenly echoed on the hardwood floor. A small boy, maybe 6 or 7, peeked in shyly from behind the doorframe. Pale pajamas, tousled dark hair, a toy airplane clutched tightly in his hand. His eyes were strikingly similar to Grayson's, but they lacked the spark. "Hey, buddy," Grayson said gently. "This is Miss Lena. She helped me today." The boy didn't respond, just stared, nervous, unsure. There was a fragility in his posture, the kind that came from wounds too deep for words. Lena smiled and knelt beside the coffee table, meeting his eye level. "I like your plane," she said softly. "Is it a fast one?" The boy hesitated, then gave the tiniest nod. "What's its name?" she asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, then whispered, "Skyburn." Lena's smile widened. "Skyburn, that's a strong name. Bet it flies higher than the clouds." And then, like a drop of sunlight slipping through a storm, the boy smiled. Grayson's chest tightened. It was the first real smile his son had shown in almost 2 years. After Ella, his wife, died in a sudden car accident, their son Mason had shut the world out. No speaking, no laughing. Therapists came and went. So did nannies, teachers, specialists. Nothing reached him. But now this stranger, this homeless woman who came here with nothing but integrity, was sitting on his rug talking to Mason like they'd been friends for years. "Want to show me how Skyburn flies?" Lena asked. Mason walked forward, placed the plane in her hand, and then sat beside her. Grayson didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched, his heart caught somewhere between disbelief and awe. He hadn't just found his wallet today. He had found something that couldn't be bought. The light from the fireplace flickered gently across the walls as Mason scooted closer to Lena, his tiny fingers tapping the wings of the toy plane against her arm with quiet excitement. It was a sound Grayson hadn't heard in far too long, a child not just playing but reaching. He stood at the threshold of that living room, unable to speak, barely able to breathe. She was kneeling on the floor, dressed in worn shoes and a borrowed coat, her hair pulled back with a simple tie. Yet somehow Lena looked like she belonged more than anyone who had ever walked these halls in tailored silk. Mason turned to look at his father and said, with the purest honesty, "She made Skyburn fly." Grayson felt something inside him give way. "Lena," he said softly. She looked up, startled by the sound of her name in his voice. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" She nodded, brushing imaginary crumbs from her skirt before standing. Mason didn't protest. He simply stayed on the rug, spinning the plane in slow circles like he was drawing new skies. Grayson led her down a quiet hallway and into a sunlit study that smelled faintly of cedar and old books. He closed the door behind them. The silence between them held something sacred. "I was going to think of a way to thank you," he said at last, standing beside the bookshelf. "A gift, a meal, a letter, something that would feel appropriate." "You don't have to thank me," Lena replied, her voice steady. "I didn't do it to be thanked." "I know." He turned to face her. "That's what makes it so rare." She didn't look away, but her eyes shimmered, like a lake holding back the storm. He walked slowly to the desk and picked up a pen, then set it down again. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from realizing he was about to change someone's life. "I want to offer you something," he said carefully. "Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because I think you might be the person this house has been waiting for." Lena blinked, confused. "I don't understand." "I want to hire you," he said, "not as a cleaner, not for errands. I want you to stay here, as Mason's companion, his caregiver, his safe place." She took a small step back instinctively. "Mr. Whitmore—" "Grayson," he corrected gently. "Grayson, I don't have any degrees. I'm not trained. I'm just—" Her voice cracked. "I'm just someone who's been trying to survive." "And that's exactly what Mason needs," he replied without hesitation. "Someone who knows how to keep going when the world gets quiet and cold. Someone who doesn't ask a child to be anything but himself." Lena stared at him, stunned. "You'll live here," he continued. "You'll have a room of your own, food, clothes, a salary, time if you want to study or build something for yourself again. No strings, just presence, just heart." She covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." Say yes, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And let me help you, the way you helped me, without even knowing. A long silence followed, and then slowly Lena nodded. Her voice shook as she answered, I say yes. Grayson extended his hand across the space between them, and as her hand met his, calloused and thin, it wasn't just a job offer, it was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. That evening, Lena sat on the edge of the bed in her new room, if she could even call it that. The sheets smelled like lavender and sunshine. The walls were soft cream, and the closet across the room stood half open, revealing neatly hung clothes Grayson's assistant must have prepared for her. Simple things, nothing flashy, but the fact that they had been picked just for her nearly undid her. She still hadn't touched the dinner tray the housekeeper had brought up. It felt wrong somehow, like if she ate the meal, it would confirm that this wasn't a dream. She touched the blanket beside her, fingers dragging across the texture, grounding herself. A knock came at the door. She stood quickly, smoothing her borrowed shirt. Yes? The door opened slowly, and there stood Mason, his small silhouette backlit by the hallway lamp. I brought you this, he said, holding out a drawing. 3 stick figures beneath a house with a smiling sun and a crooked airplane in the corner. He pointed. That's me. That's Dad. That's you. Lena swallowed hard. You drew this for me? Mason nodded shyly. It's our house now. She crouched to his level and took the paper gently, like it was made of glass. I'll hang it up, she whispered, so I see it every morning. He smiled, then surprised her by leaning forward and hugging her waist. It was brief, awkward, but utterly genuine. Then, like nothing had happened, he turned and padded back down the hallway to his room. Lena stood in the doorway for a long time after he left, the drawing pressed to her chest, her eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to hide. That night, as she finally drifted to sleep beneath the softest sheets she'd felt in years, Lena whispered to the ceiling above her, I'm home. The next morning brought sunshine pouring through the tall windows, the kind that made everything feel freshly possible. Lena stepped into the kitchen just as the scent of brewed coffee filled the air. The housekeeper, Maria, smiled kindly from over the stove. Good morning, dear. Did you sleep? Like I hadn't slept in months, Lena replied, pushed it with a shy smile. Maria handed her a warm biscuit and gestured to a small table, already set with 2 mugs. Mr. Whitmore usually has breakfast at 7. Mason eats closer to 8. You'll get used to their rhythms. Lena nodded, sitting down slowly, still not used to the idea of a seat reserved for her. At exactly 8 on the dot, Mason walked into the room still in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. He looked at Lena, saw her, and without a word, walked over and sat beside her. I dreamed Skyburn had rockets, he said. Did it fly to the moon, she asked. He shook his head. Just to the backyard, but it was fast. They both laughed, quietly but completely. From the top of the stairs, Grayson stood watching for a moment before entering. He had traded his suit for a buttoned shirt and jeans, something casual, more like the man he used to be. Everyone all right in here, he asked, his tone light. Lena nodded, meeting his eyes briefly. We're just flying. The days that followed settled into a gentle rhythm. Mornings started with warm tea and morning drawings. Afternoons were filled with backyard adventures and made-up games. Mason began humming little songs. He started asking questions. He even started sleeping through the night without waking from nightmares. And Lena, she began to breathe again. Each day she felt herself stitching back together, not with thread or effort, but with something much more powerful, belonging. Grayson watched it all, quietly, carefully. And every time Lena looked at him, something passed between them, something unspoken, something growing. But neither of them said a word, not yet. The following week moved gently, like soft waves against the shore. Lena fell into a rhythm she had almost forgotten. Purpose. Not just in tasks or routines, but in the way Mason looked for her every morning. How he grinned whenever she entered the room, or how he curled up beside her with a book in hand, like he'd known her his whole life. She spent her mornings helping him with simple lessons, and her afternoons letting him lead her into the wild lands of his imagination, blanket forts that became galaxies, spoons that became swords, and questions like, do airplanes ever get lonely in the sky? She answered every one, always gently, always with time. And Grayson noticed. One afternoon, after a long boardroom meeting, he returned home early. He stepped into the hallway just as Lena passed through, carrying Mason's latest crayon masterpiece. This one featured a spaceship, a doll, and what appeared to be a slice of pizza floating in space. "Do you have a moment?" Grayson asked softly, his voice lower than usual. Lena paused. "Of course." They stepped into the library, where the late daylight bathed the room in gold. Grayson motioned toward a leather chair, and Lena sat slowly. "I've been thinking," he began, folding his sleeves. "You've been here nearly 2 weeks. I know this wasn't part of your plan, and you didn't come here to stay. But I also know this house hasn't felt this alive in years." Lena kept her gaze low, unsure where this was going. "You mentioned before," he continued, "that you'd left school, that you'd had dreams once." She looked up, surprised. "Did you ever want to go back?" he asked. "I used to," she admitted. "I wanted to study child development or family counseling. I liked understanding people, especially children. But after my grandmother passed, it all disappeared. I barely finished high school." Grayson nodded thoughtfully. "What if I told you I could help?" Lena leaned back slightly. "Grayson, I don't want to take advantage." "You're not," he said firmly. "You've done more for my son than any therapist, tutor, or educator ever could. And I think you have a gift. All I want is to give you the tools to grow it." She hesitated, her fingers curling into her lap. "I don't know if I can." "You already are," he replied softly. "Every day with Mason proves it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lena said quietly, "No one's ever believed in me like that before." "Then it's time someone did." That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Lena pulled out the old, worn notebook she had carried with her since the streets. Most of its pages were blank. But tonight, for the first time, she wrote, "Today, someone asked me what I used to dream about. Maybe tomorrow I'll start remembering." She closed the notebook and whispered, "Thank you," into the quiet of her room, not to any one person, but to the life she was starting to rebuild. The next morning, a manila envelope appeared on the kitchen table with her name written neatly on the front. Inside was a folder labeled Enrollment Options, Online and Evening Classes. At the bottom was a yellow sticky note. "Let me help you reach what's already inside you. No pressure, just possibility. G." Lena stood in the kitchen, one hand over her mouth, the other clutching that note like a lifeline. Mason entered moments later, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and looked at her curiously. "What's that?" She smiled, blinking back tears. "Hope." The kitchen clock ticked softly as Lena sat at the table that evening, a highlighter in one hand and her first study packet open in front of her. Terms like developmental stages, emotional scaffolding, and nonverbal bonding danced across the page. The words were new, but the meaning behind them. She had lived. From the doorway, Grayson watched her for a moment, unnoticed. Her hair was tied in a loose knot. She wore one of the soft cardigans Maria had left in her closet, sleeves pushed up, face thoughtful. He didn't say a word. He just looked. Not at the clothes or the book, but at the way she belonged in the quiet, at the way peace looked good on her. He cleared his throat and she looked up, startled. "Sorry, I didn't see you." "No need to apologize," he said. "You're focused." She nodded and smiled softly. "Feels strange to be studying again, like I'm borrowing someone else's future." Grayson stepped forward and set a cup of tea down in front of her. "It's yours," he said. "You're not borrowing anything." Lena looked at the tea, then at him. She wanted to say thank you, but the words felt too small. So instead she whispered, "You make it easy to believe in things again." Grayson's breath caught in his chest, but he simply nodded and walked away. Because if he stayed, he might have said too much. The next few weeks moved like autumn leaves. Slow, beautiful, full of change. Mason was thriving. He laughed more now. He invented games. He asked to go to the library and showed Lena every book with dragons or planets. He even began drawing again. Not just imaginary lands, but pictures of the three of them. Grayson, Lena, and himself holding hands beneath a house with crooked windows and a glowing sun. He called it home. Grayson framed the drawing and hung it in the hallway without saying a word. It was a Thursday evening when Lena came into the kitchen to find Grayson already there, sleeves rolled up, his tie draped over the back of a chair. He was chopping vegetables with a focus that made her smile. "Need help?" she asked. Grayson looked up. Only if you promise not to laugh at my cooking. I make no promises, she said, slipping off her cardigan. They worked in rhythm, her at the stove, him at the cutting board. No music, no background noise, just the clink of pans, the soft boil of water, and the occasional shared glance that lingered just a second too long. When dinner was done, Mason came bounding in, declaring the soup the best in the galaxy. They laughed, sat, and ate around a table that now echoed with life. Afterward, Lena washed the dishes while Grayson dried. Their hands moved side by side, and every so often they brushed. "Do you ever think," he asked suddenly, "that people can get lost and still find their way back?" She looked at him, water dripping from her fingers. "Yes," she said, "but only if someone's waiting for them on the other side." He met her eyes then, and in that quiet, something passed between them. Not words, not yet, but something truer. That night, Grayson stood outside Mason's room and listened to the sound of his son's laughter as Lena read to him about a bear who built a rocket out of spoons. He leaned his head against the doorframe, closing his eyes. He had spent so long in silence. And now there was light. The air outside had turned crisp. The kind of cold that hinted winter was quietly making its way into the city. The trees around the Whitmore estate had begun to shed their golden leaves, and the ground crunched gently beneath every step. That evening, after Mason had gone to bed and Maria had retired to her quarters, Lena stepped onto the back porch with a notebook tucked under her arm. She liked this hour, the hush between the end of the day and the start of dreams. She sat on the wooden bench beneath the old tree, her knees tucked to her chest, the stars scattered above like someone had spilled diamonds across the sky. She didn't hear Grayson approach until he gently set a mug beside her. "Chamomile," he said, "helps with overthinking." She smiled without looking at him. "Then I should have been drinking it my whole life." He sat beside her, not too close, but not far either. For a while, they said nothing. It was a silence that didn't ache. It felt full, not empty. Then Grayson spoke, his voice quiet. "I used to sit here with Ella. Sometimes we wouldn't even talk. She just liked the way the trees moved at night." Lena looked over at him. He wasn't smiling, but his face was soft. "She sounds like someone who saw the beauty in little things." "She did," he said. "She saw beauty even in me." Lena waited. She didn't interrupt. She knew the weight of stories that take time to spill. "I was on the phone with her when the accident happened," he continued. "We were arguing about something silly, carpet samples of all things. Then the line went dead. And that was it. No goodbye, no closure, just silence." His hands clenched in his lap, and he stared straight ahead. "I blamed myself for a long time. Still do, sometimes. Mason was only 4. He lost his mother, and I lost myself. I tried to keep things running, but I wasn't really here. Not for him, not for me." Lena turned to him, her eyes filled with something deeper than pity. It was recognition. "I know what it's like to lose someone who made the world feel safe," she said softly. "After my grandmother died, I stopped feeling like I belonged anywhere. I carried her memory like a blanket, but it couldn't keep me warm. Grief, it turns the world upside down." Grayson looked at her, really looked. "You've been through so much, and still, here you are." "I didn't have a choice," she whispered. "I had to keep walking, even when it felt like the road wasn't leading anywhere." "And now," she paused, "now, for the first time in years, I feel like I'm not walking alone." A long moment passed between them. Grayson reached for her hand, slowly as if asking permission. Lena didn't pull away. Their fingers laced together under the starlight, and nothing needed to be said, because in that simple gesture, something old ended, and something new quietly, beautifully began. The days that followed felt different, not because anything was said outright, but because everything between Lena and Grayson had changed. The silence was no longer filled with distance. It carried something warm, like the hush before a song begins. They moved around each other, yet like people who were slowly beginning to believe they deserved something good. Mason, blissfully unaware of the quiet tension, continued to flourish. He asked Lena to help him build rockets out of oatmeal boxes, to draw maps of imaginary kingdoms, and to tell him stories that always ended with hope. And Grayson, who had once buried himself in work to numb the ache of loss, began coming home early, not out of duty, but out of desire. He stayed through dinner, through bedtime stories. Sometimes he just stood in the doorway, listening to the sound of his son laugh again, and watching the woman who brought that laughter back. One evening, after Mason had gone to bed early, Lena came downstairs to find the lights in the dining room dimmed, a single candle flickering in the center of the table. She paused in the doorway. Grayson stood at the counter, pouring 2 glasses of wine. He turned when he saw her. "I was hoping we could talk," he said. "No dishes, no homework, just you and me." Lena hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. They sat across from each other in the gentle glow of the candlelight, the house unusually still. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees, but inside the world felt hushed. Waiting, Grayson took a slow breath. His voice was calm, but something trembled beneath the surface. "I never expected any of this. When you showed up that day, I thought, maybe I was being conned. That happens in my world. People come to take." Lena nodded slowly. "I figured as much." "But you didn't ask for anything," he continued. "You gave instead. Honesty, time, kindness. You brought my son back to life. And in doing that, you brought me back too." Lena looked down at her hands. "Grayson." He leaned forward slightly, his voice softer now. "I don't want to keep pretending this is just about gratitude, or coincidence, or convenience." She looked up at him, really looked. "I'm falling in love with you, Lena." The words landed like a wave, not loud, not dramatic, but deep, certain, final. Lena blinked, stunned. You, you don't have to say that." "I'm not saying it because I have to," he said. "I'm saying it because it's the truth. You don't have to answer. I just need you to know." She was silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "I'm scared." "I know," he replied. "Me too." She swallowed hard. "I've spent so long surviving. I don't know how to let someone love me." "Then we'll take it slow," he said. "We won't rush. We won't label anything. We'll just keep being here, one day at a time." Lena felt her eyes sting, but she didn't cry. She smiled, and somehow that smile said everything she couldn't yet voice. That night, as Lena lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her heart beat in a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. Not of fear, not of uncertainty, but of beginning. The morning after Grayson's quiet confession, the world didn't feel different. Not exactly. The coffee still brewed at 7 a.m. Mason still came bounding into the kitchen, socks half on, and hair sticking up like he'd wrestled the wind. Maria still sang softly as she whisked eggs. But Lena felt different. Not because of what Grayson had said, but because of what she hadn't done. She hadn't run. She hadn't doubted herself. And for the first time in her life, she hadn't looked in the mirror and felt like she was only passing through someone else's world. Later that day, as Mason played on the rug in the living room with a mess of crayons and pipe cleaners, Lena quietly folded laundry in the corner. He suddenly looked up and held something out. It was a paper crown. "I made it for you," he said. "For me? You're the queen of the spaceship kingdom," he explained, "and the queen has to sit next to the pilot. That's me." Lena sat down beside him, holding the little crown in her hands like it was made of glass. "Do you like it?" he asked, wide-eyed. "I love it," she whispered. "It's the best crown I've ever had." Mason smiled and leaned against her shoulder, and for a moment, just a moment, Lena imagined what it might feel like to be someone's mother, someone's safe place, someone's forever. That afternoon, Lena walked past Grayson's office on her way upstairs. She paused, then backtracked, standing at the open door. He was seated at his desk, glasses on, going through documents. He looked up when he noticed her. "Am I interrupting?" "Never." She walked in slowly, the paper crown still in her hand. "Mason made me royalties," she joked. Grayson chuckled, sitting back. "He's got taste." She stepped closer, her voice more serious now. "I wanted to thank you for the classes, for the way you see me." "I just see what's already there," he said. "I didn't. Not before." She looked at her own hands, at the delicate way her fingers held the crown. "I used to think being invisible was safer. That if no one saw me, they couldn't leave me." Grayson's smile faded, not in disappointment, but in quiet understanding. "But now," he asked, "now I think maybe being seen isn't so scary, not when it's by the right people." Grayson stood slowly, walking around the desk until he was standing just a few feet from her. You're not invisible here, Lena. You never were. She looked up at him, and for a moment, her chest ached with the weight of all the years she'd gone unseen. He reached forward, not to touch her, not yet, but to place a small piece of folded paper in her palm. What's this? She asked. Something I wrote, before I had the courage to say it out loud. She unfolded it. In Grayson's strong, steady handwriting, the note read, "The moment you walked through my gate, I thought I was losing control. Turns out, I was just finding the part of myself I'd buried." Lena didn't speak. She couldn't, but she didn't look away. Not this time. That evening, as she tucked Mason into bed and kissed his forehead, he whispered, "You make everything better." Lena sat on the edge of the bed, brushing his hair back gently. "So do you." He looked up at her, sleepy but serious. "Do you think people can have more than one family?" Lena blinked. "I think people make families, the real kind, not just by blood, but by love." "Then you're mine," Mason said simply. Her throat closed with emotion. "And you're mine, sweetheart." The community college wasn't far from the estate, but for Lena, it felt like crossing a galaxy. That Monday morning, she stood outside the classroom building, clutching her worn canvas bag and a fresh notebook. Her name was printed neatly on the course roster now, Lena Carter, student of early childhood development. She hadn't been a student in years, not since life had forced her into survival mode. And yet, here she was. Every instinct in her whispered she didn't belong. The other students looked younger, confident, like they hadn't slept in shelters or skipped meals to make rent. But then she reached into her bag and felt a small, folded note Mason had tucked in without her knowing. "You're brave like a rocket. Go be loud in the sky." Her lips trembled into a smile. She walked through the door. That evening, Lena returned home with ink smudged on her fingers, her mind spinning with new terms and theories, and a spark in her chest she hadn't felt in years. Pride. She walked into the kitchen to find Grayson chopping vegetables again, this time with a little more confidence. "You're really getting good at that," she teased. "I haven't burned the house down yet, so I'd call it a win." She set her bag down and leaned against the counter, watching him. "How was it?" he asked gently. Lena hesitated, then smiled. "It was terrifying and wonderful and hard, but I didn't run. I stayed, I took notes, I asked a question." Grayson's eyes lit up. "You asked a question?" "On purpose," she said proudly, and no one laughed. He reached for a second plate. "Then we celebrate. Pasta and garlic bread. You know my weakness." They ate together in the warm light of the kitchen, their laughter weaving easily between sips of wine and the soft clink of forks. After dinner, Lena stepped into the living room where Mason was sprawled across the floor, drawing another imaginary kingdom. "Guess what I did today?" she asked, flopping down beside him. "Built a rocket?" "Close. I went to school." Mason's eyes widened. "Like real school?" "Real school, with teachers and books and other students." He looked genuinely impressed. "Did you learn something cool?" "I did," she said. "I learned that sometimes the scariest part of a new adventure is walking through the door." Mason nodded solemnly. "That's like the first time I slid down the big slide." "Exactly like that." He handed her a crayon and a fresh sheet of paper. "Then you need your own flag," he said. "Every kingdom hero has one." Lena looked at the blank page, then at the little boy who had become her heart's compass. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's draw my flag." Later that night, Grayson found her curled up in the library, her notebook open, her fingers scribbling reflections from the day. He paused in the doorway, just watching her for a while. "You really did it," he said. She looked up. "We did it." He smiled, then stepped closer. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For reminding me that I'm allowed to want more, to build something, to become." He reached down and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You already have." A few days later, Lena found herself standing in the backyard garden, watching Mason run in circles with a cardboard sword and a towel tied around his neck like a cape. "I'm Captain Starburst," he declared, "protector of the Sky Kingdom." Lena bowed low, playing along. "Then I am Lady Lena, keeper of snacks and stories." Mason giggled so hard he tripped into a pile of leaves, sending a whirlwind of color into the air. From the balcony above, Grayson watched them, his son, and the woman who had quietly, miraculously reassembled the broken pieces of their lives. He was holding a small velvet box, his thumb tracing the edge of it slowly. No, he wasn't proposing. Not yet. But he was planning. That evening, as Mason drifted to sleep with a flashlight and a book under the covers, Grayson found Lena in the kitchen with flour on her shirt and a bowl of cookie dough in front of her. "You bake now?" he teased, leaning on the counter. "I'm attempting. Maria says it's therapy in a bowl." "She's not wrong." Lena handed him a spoonful. "Try it." He took a bite and raised his eyebrows. "You've been hiding this talent." She smiled, but then more softly she asked, "Grayson, why are you looking at me like that?" He paused, caught off guard. "Like what?" "Like I'm something rare." He didn't look away. "Because you are." Her chest tightened. "Don't say that if you don't mean it." "I've never said anything more truthfully in my life," he replied. She stared at him for a moment too long. Then, to deflect the intensity, she shoved another spoonful of dough toward him. "No more looking at me like I'm a poem," she said playfully. "Eat, before it burns." He laughed and the tension lifted, but the feeling stayed. The next morning, Lena walked into the dining room and found a note under her coffee cup. "Clear your evening. Dress up a little. Let me show you something beautiful. Gee." Her breath caught in her throat. She folded the note gently and tucked it into her pocket. That evening, Maria helped her get ready. A simple navy blue dress, soft curls falling at her shoulders, a pair of modest heels. She wasn't trying to impress. She was trying to believe. When she walked downstairs, Grayson was already waiting in a charcoal jacket and open collar. His eyes widened for just a second, and that was enough. "You look," he began, "like someone who used to live in a shelter?" She said, self-conscious. "No," he said, stepping closer, "like someone I can't believe I get to stand next to." She looked away, tears threatening. "This is all still so strange." Grayson offered his arm. "Then let's make it feel familiar." She took it, and just like that, they walked into the night together. The car ride was quiet but not heavy. Lena sat in the passenger seat, watching the city slip by in a blur of streetlights and reflections. Every now and then she'd glance at Grayson, his hands on the steering wheel. Calm, sure. And yet, something about the way his thumb tapped lightly against the leather said he was nervous too. He pulled into the parking circle of the Langley Hotel, one of the most elegant buildings in the city. The entrance was lit like a grand stage. Glass doors, golden trim, and a waiting valet. Lena's breath caught. "Grayson, I don't think I—" "You do," he said gently. "You belong here. Just stay by my side." She nodded slowly, heart pounding. He opened her door, offered his hand, and she took it, stepping into a world that once would have ignored her completely. Inside, the ballroom shimmered. Chandeliers floated like stars. Waiters moved in elegant lines with glasses of champagne. People dressed in suits and silk murmured in clusters. Grayson led her to their reserved table near the center. People noticed. Of course they did. There were stares, curious glances, a few whispered questions, but Grayson didn't flinch. He introduced her. By name. With pride. "This is Lena Carter," he said to investors, to board members, to colleagues who didn't know how to hide their surprise. "She's part of our life now. Not friend, not employee, just Lena, just as she was." And the way he said it, like her name meant something sacred, made her knees weak. During dinner, Lena said little. She watched, listened, responded when needed. She felt like she was balancing on a wire, trying not to let the voices from her past pull her down. "You're not supposed to be here. This isn't your world. Go back to where you belong." But every time she started to slip, Grayson would glance her way, and his quiet smile was a lifeline. After dessert, when the speeches began and the music softened, he leaned in. "Do you want to step out for a bit?" "Yes," she whispered, relieved. They slipped onto the terrace, a wide space with string lights and a view of the city skyline that stretched like a painted horizon. Lena wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I don't think I fit in there." Grayson stepped beside her. "You fit with me. That's enough." She looked up at him, the city lights reflected in her eyes. "Why did you bring me here?" "Because I wanted you to see yourself the way I do," he said. "Because I'm proud to be with you." Her breath caught. And because I'm falling in love with you, Lena, every day, in every little moment. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Then we'll figure it out together. She took a step closer. I'm still scared. So am I, he replied. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. That's when she leaned in, not all the way, just enough to let her forehead rest against his chest. And Grayson wrapped his arms around her, gently, protectively, like he was holding everything he thought he'd lost. The next morning, Lena awoke before the sun. She sat in the window seat of her bedroom, knees tucked to her chest, watching the faint blush of dawn stretch across the sky. The dress from the night before hung neatly on a hanger, as if it were evidence of a dream she wasn't sure she had lived. But it wasn't a dream. Grayson had held her like she was something precious. He had said he was falling in love, and she had let herself believe it. That morning, the world felt softer, not because it had changed, but because she had. Downstairs, Maria was already stirring, slicing fruit with the familiar rhythm of someone who had known heartache and still believed in mornings. She greeted Lena with a smile that held no questions, only quiet understanding. There's coffee, she said, and I saved the last of the cinnamon rolls. Lena smiled, warmed by the simplicity of it. She was halfway through breakfast when Mason stumbled into the kitchen, his hair wild and his voice full of sleep. You look like a princess, he said, yawning as he climbed into the chair next to her. That was last night, she said, smiling. Today I'm just me. He shook his head stubbornly. You're always magic. She reached over and tousled his hair. So are you. Later that afternoon, while Grayson was out for a meeting, Lena wandered into the garden. The sky was a soft, endless blue. Mason was playing with a bus of old sidewalk chalk, drawing crooked stars on the stone path. You want to help? He asked. Always. They spent the next hour drawing planets and comets and wild things with wings. Mason stopped suddenly and said, Can I draw our house? Sure, Lena said. He sketched a simple square with a triangle roof. Then he drew 3 stick figures in front. One tall, one medium, and one small with a crown. That's me, he said, pointing to the crown. And that's you and Dad. Lena looked at the chalk outline of the family she never thought she'd have. Do you miss your mom? She asked gently. Mason nodded. A lot, but it doesn't hurt as much now. I think she'd be okay with us being happy. Lena felt something catch in her throat. She would, she whispered. I believe that too. That evening, Grayson returned home early. He found Lena on the porch swing, a book in her lap and a peaceful expression on her face. He walked over and stood beside her, silent for a moment. You seem calm. I feel calm, she said, for once. He smiled and took a seat beside her. There's something I want to ask you, he said, but not here. Not now, soon. Lena looked at him carefully. You don't have to rush. I'm not rushing, he replied. I'm choosing. And I want to choose you, over and over again. She rested her head on his shoulder. I think I'm ready to stop waiting for it all to fall apart, she said quietly. Grayson leaned his cheek against her hair. Good, he said, because this, what we're building, it's real. The days that followed felt less like a dream and more like a rhythm, one Lena was finally learning to trust. Mornings began with tea and chalk drawings. Afternoons were spent between her coursework and helping Mason plant seeds in the backyard garden. Evenings often ended with a soft kind of laughter. Grayson reading headlines aloud in a dramatic voice. Mason pretending to be unimpressed, Lena giggling quietly behind her hand. There was a kind of peace growing around them, not the kind you stumble into, but the kind you build carefully, moment by moment. Lena was starting to believe it might last. One evening, after tucking Mason into bed, she stepped into the hallway and found Grayson waiting there, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. He looked relaxed, but his eyes held something else. Come with me, he asked. She followed him without question, through the house, down a quiet corridor, and into a room she hadn't seen before. It wasn't grand or decorated, just a space with soft lighting, a long wooden table, and boxes stacked neatly on the side. What is this? She asked. Grayson pulled a box forward, opened the lid, and revealed an array of sketches, floor plans, and children's books. I started this project a year ago, he said, before you came, but I shelved it. It didn't feel right without Her. Lena looked at the sketches, rooms full of color, play areas, reading nooks, small beds with cubby shelves beside them. A children's center? He nodded. For kids who've been through too much too early. I wanted to build a space for them to be seen, to feel safe, to heal. She was quiet for a moment, her fingers trailing over the edge of the plans. It's beautiful, she whispered. I've been thinking about restarting it, he said. With you. She turned to him slowly, surprised. I want you to help lead it, he said. Your course, your heart, your instincts. You already do this every day with Mason. You belong in this. Lena felt tears rising but didn't let them fall. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Grayson said gently. Say yes to building something that matters. With me. She looked at the plans again. A children's center, a place for little hands and big feelings, a place she might have needed once herself. She looked back at him and nodded. Yes, she said softly, let's build it. That night, when she returned to her room, she pulled out her notebook, the one she'd carried through the hardest nights. She flipped to a blank page and wrote, I'm not surviving anymore. I'm living. And for the first time, it feels like this life fits me. The next morning started like many others, with laughter in the kitchen and crumbs on the counter. But there was something in the air, something different. Grayson had left early for meetings, though he kissed Mason's head and whispered something into his son's ear that made the boy smile with a secret only kids could keep. Lena noticed the change in Mason's mood almost immediately. He wasn't just cheerful, he was thoughtful, as if a little idea had sprouted in his mind and was slowly unfurling into something bigger. Later that afternoon, as they built a spaceship from old cardboard boxes in the sunroom, Mason looked up and said, Do you think people can choose their families? Lena paused mid-cut with the scissors. I do, she said. I think family is about love, not just who you're born to. Good, Mason said, because I choose you. Her hand stopped. Mason. He looked up at her, eyes so sincere it made her chest ache. I want to call you Mom. Lena's throat tightened. Sweetheart, you don't have to say yes, he added quickly. I already feel it, and I think my real mom would want me to be happy. Tears wellowed in her eyes, but she blinked them back. I'd be honored, she whispered, reaching out to pull him into a tight, trembling hug. You can call me anything you want, but if you choose Mom, just know I'll spend every day earning it. I already think you have, Mason murmured into her shoulder. Meanwhile, across the city, Grayson stood inside a quiet jewelry shop, speaking in hushed tones to a trusted friend. He was holding something small in his hand, a delicate ring, not extravagant, but meaningful, a thin band of gold with a soft stone the color of a storm-lit sky. She doesn't want grand, he said. She wants real. She's lived too much life for anything less. The shop owner smiled knowingly. Then this is perfect. Grayson nodded, sliding the ring box into his pocket. His hands were steady, but his heart wasn't. He wasn't nervous because he didn't know what he felt. He was nervous because he had never been this sure about anything. That evening, when he returned home, Mason ran to him with the excitement of a boy carrying the biggest news in the universe. Dad, I told her. Grayson crouched down, amused. Told her what? That I want to call her Mom, and she said yes, well, kind of. She cried a little, but the happy kind. Grayson looked past Mason and saw Lena standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes shining. He stood slowly, his gaze locking with hers. Big day, he said softly. She nodded. The biggest. And in that quiet space between them, Grayson slipped his hand into his pocket, fingers brushing the box. But he didn't pull it out. Not yet. Not tonight. He wanted the moment to be exactly right. Because when you ask someone who's been broken by life to trust again, you only get one chance to ask with your whole heart. The sky was clear the next morning. One of those rare days when the sun seemed to rise a little slower, casting long streaks of gold across the lawn like it didn't want to miss what was about to happen. Grayson paced the garden path just after sunrise, the ring box heavy in his coat pocket, not because of weight, but meaning. His heart thudded like it had the first time he held Mason after Ella died. That same vulnerable trembling of a man stepping into something bigger than himself. Inside, Lena stood at the window watching him from the second floor, unaware of the box, unaware of the plan. All she knew was that something had been shifting between them, not fading but solidifying. Like the way you know winter has passed, not because of a calendar, but because something in your bones begins to thaw. Maria peeked in and smiled knowingly. He's been out there all morning, she said gently. Lena turned, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. Why do I feel like something's about to change? Maria just patted her hand. Maybe it already has. Later, Grayson asked her to meet him by the old stone fountain in the back garden. She came barefoot, in a soft knit sweater and jeans, her hair tied up loosely, beautiful not because of effort, but because of presence. He turned when he heard her approach. I've seen you here before, he said, smiling. Standing in this exact spot. The first time I watched you and Mason draw chalk stars. I remember, she said. He stepped forward slowly. I brought you here because I didn't want this to happen in a restaurant or a hotel ballroom or any of the places I used to think were important. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was the ring, simple, elegant, steady, like her. Lena froze. Grayson, you walked through my gate with nothing but a lost wallet and a heart full of integrity. You brought my son back to life. You gave me back the pieces of myself I thought I'd buried with Ella. She swallowed hard, her hand rising to her mouth. I'm not asking you to leave behind the past, he continued. I'm asking you to build a future. With me, with Mason, as my partner, my best friend, my wife. A long silence. The kind of silence that only happens before everything changes. Then Lena whispered, yes. And not because it was expected, not because it was overdue, but because she had finally stopped waiting for the moment to fall apart and realized it was hers to step into. Grayson slid the ring onto her finger, then wrapped his arms around her like a man finally holding the thing he'd lost, then found, then promised never to let go. From the window upstairs, Mason watched them, his face pressed to the glass. He turned and ran down the hallway, shouting with the full force of joy, she said yes. Maria laughed and shook her head. Lord, help this house. We've got a wedding coming. 3 weeks later, beneath a sky brushed with soft clouds and sunlight that felt like a blessing, Lena Carter stood barefoot in the garden she had once swept leaves from, now walking down the aisle to become someone's wife, someone's mother, and no longer a visitor in her own life. There was no cathedral, no towering floral arrangements, just a wooden archway draped in white linen, just a few dozen chairs filled with the people who mattered, just Grayson standing beneath that arch with tears in his eyes, and Mason proudly holding the ring pillow and grinning so wide it nearly split his face. Lena wore a pale ivory dress that swayed like wind in tall grass. Her hair was in a braid with tiny baby's breath woven between the strands. Simple, natural, beautiful. She carried no bouquet. She didn't need one. She walked holding Mason's hand. And when they reached Grayson, Mason gently placed her hand in his father's, then looked up at both of them with a whisper only they could hear. You're both my forever now. The ceremony was short. There were no dramatic readings, no long-winded speeches, just Grayson, standing tall, voice steady. You walked into my life when I wasn't looking for love, and somehow, without trying, you became the heart of everything that matters. I vow to never make you feel small again, never let you forget your worth, and to walk beside you always wherever life takes us. Then Lena, with her hands trembling but her voice clear, you saw me before I saw myself. You didn't rescue me. You reminded me that I never needed rescuing, just someone to believe. I vow to protect the world we're building and to love you every day without pretending to be anything but who I truly am. When they kissed, Mason threw fistfuls of flower petals into the air and yelled, best day ever. And no one disagreed. The reception was held under the old oak trees with candles and mason jars and music that drifted through the leaves. Maria served her famous lemon cake and Grayson danced with Lena like no one was watching, though everyone was. Mason wore a bow tie and sneakers and led the parade of cousins, friends, and neighbors through the yard in celebration. At one point, Grayson whispered to Lena, This is what peace feels like. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I think I finally believe in forever. That night, when the celebration had ended and Mason had fallen asleep still wearing his tie and one shoe, Lena stood on the back porch wrapped in a blanket, looking at the stars. Grayson stepped behind her and slipped his arms around her waist. She smiled. Do you remember the night I found your wallet? He laughed quietly. How could I forget? I almost didn't return it. You almost didn't change my life. They stood there silent as the moon cast silver across the garden. Then Lena said, To think, all of this started with a choice to do the right thing, not knowing it would lead me to the life I didn't think I deserved. Grayson kissed her cheek. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you always know you do. And they did. Because sometimes life gives you back everything you thought you lost. Not all at once, but piece by piece, wrapped in moments of kindness, courage, and quiet love. What did you think of Lena and Grayson's story? Leave a comment and let us know. If this story touched your heart, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell for more emotional, long-form stories just like this. And remember, sometimes the smallest act of honesty becomes the door to the greatest love.